What if being incredibly good at explaining yourself is exactly what is keeping you stuck?
Have you ever noticed how easy it is to convince other people that you made the right choice, even when you secretly feel like everything is falling apart? What if your confidence isn't actually proof that you are right, but just proof that you have a really good vocabulary?
We usually assume that if someone is highly intelligent, they automatically have a deep understanding of themselves.
But what if the smartest person in the room can actually be the worst judge of their own behavior? By the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why a powerful mind can sometimes be your own worst enemy.
How your brain actively hides the truth from you to protect your ego.
And most importantly, how you can stop fooling yourself. You can easily trick another person with a logical, well-spoken argument. But what happens when the person you are trying to convince is yourself?
That is where this gets much more uncomfortable. You have probably heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
The popular internet myth is that stupid people think they are geniuses, and geniuses think they are stupid.
But that isn't actually what the science says.
When psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger ran their original experiments, they didn't find that the worst performers thought they were better than the absolute best. They found that people who lacked a specific skill simply lacked the ability to realize they were making mistakes. They mostly thought they were average. Psychologists call this a lack of metacognition, which is just a fancy way of saying thinking about your own thinking. If you don't know the rules of grammar, you cannot realize you just broke a rule of grammar. But here is the trap. The Dunning-Kruger effect does not only apply to people with low intelligence. It is entirely about specific expertise. You can be a brilliant software engineer, but because you are good at writing code, you automatically assume you can day trade stocks. Your past success in one area makes you wildly overconfident in something completely unrelated. Think of a fox that safely crosses a frozen pond in the dead of winter.
It works perfectly.
So, in late March, the fox walks out onto the exact same pond, using the exact same path, and the ice breaks.
The fox confused its past success with current safety, completely ignoring the changing conditions. Why do we do this? Why does a smart brain assume it automatically knows the answer to a problem it has never seen before?
It comes down to a massive difference between solving external problems and understanding internal reality.
Research by organizational psychologist Tasha Urish revealed something terrifying. When surveyed, 95% of people believe they are highly self-aware.
But when they are actually tested, only 10 to 15% of people truly are.
There is almost zero correlation between your general intelligence and your internal self-awareness.
Solving a complex math puzzle or coding a website relies on processing speed, logic, and working memory.
But understanding your own motives requires introspection, emotional regulation, and a willingness to feel inadequate.
You can be an absolute genius at predicting market trends while having absolutely no idea that your employees are terrified of you.
You might see a manager blaming their high turnover rate on lazy millennials, entirely blind to their own toxic management style.
It is incredibly easy to confuse knowing facts with knowing yourself. But if intelligence doesn't guarantee self-awareness, what is your brain actually doing with all that processing power when you make a mistake?
This is where your intelligence becomes a weapon used against you.
Psychologists call it motivated reasoning.
In simple terms, this is when your brain unconsciously uses its high processing power not to find the objective truth, but to protect what you already want to believe. Researcher Dan Kahan found that higher cognitive ability can actually increase polarization.
When a highly intelligent person encounters evidence that challenges their worldview, they don't usually change their mind.
Instead, they use their intelligence to aggressively spot flaws in the data.
Your brain acts like a brilliant defense attorney. If you make a mistake, your inner attorney springs into action, finds loopholes, manipulates the evidence, and builds an incredibly articulate case for why you are entirely innocent.
A person with average intelligence might just shrug and say they messed up.
A highly intelligent person will talk in circles until they convince themselves their mistake was actually a secret victory. Imagine a fox that attacks a porcupine and gets a face full of sharp quills.
Instead of admitting that attacking a porcupine was a terrible idea, the fox circles around and attacks from a different angle, convinced that the strategy was brilliant and just executed poorly.
It gets another face full of quills. Have you ever seen someone stay in a completely toxic relationship, but instead of leaving, they use complex pop psychology terms to explain away their partner's bad behavior? They aren't analyzing the situation. They are weaponizing their intelligence to avoid the pain of a breakup. But why is the brain so desperate to avoid that pain?
Before we look at the psychological reason your brain does this, I want to ask you something honestly.
Creating these videos takes a massive amount of time. It requires reading original psychology studies, fact-checking every claim, writing, and trying to simplify really complex behavioral science into something that actually helps you. I don't just want a high subscriber count. I want to know that the hours I'm putting into this are genuinely adding value to your life. If this video is making you think differently about yourself today, please take 1 second to subscribe. It is the best feedback you can give me.
Let's get back to it. Your brain protects you because admitting you are wrong physically hurts.
Neurologically, the pain circuitry in your brain processes the realization of a deep mistake almost identically to a physical injury. So, your mind uses cognitive biases to shield you. But if you're smart, you might be thinking, I already know about cognitive biases, so I'm protected. That is exactly the trap. Psychologist Emily Pronin discovered something called the bias blind spot. Her research showed that even after people have cognitive biases explained to them,
85% still insist they are less biased than the average person. Reading about psychology doesn't automatically stop you from fooling yourself.
often, it just makes you better at diagnosing your friends while completely ignoring your own behavior. Daniel Kahneman, who spent his life studying how we think,
noted that intelligent people have a very powerful logical brain, but they are often cognitive misers.
they trust their fast, intuitive, emotional gut reactions and simply don't bother using their logical brain to double-check their own answers. Feeling certain is an emotion. It is not proof of accuracy. Consider a fox that calculates a brilliant, complex 12-step mathematical path to safely remove the bait from a heavy trap. While it is doing the math in the dirt, calculating every variable, a younger fox just kicks the trap with a stick, triggers it safely,
and eats the food. How many times have you spent 40 hours reading about perfect gym biomechanics or diet optimization, but never actually went to the gym?
Intelligent people constantly confuse the understanding of a problem with the actual solution. But what happens when the very label of being smart becomes the thing holding you back? When your entire identity is built around being the smart one, being wrong feels like a death threat to your ego.
This ties into Carol Dweck's famous research on mindset. If you grew up being praised specifically for being smart, you may have developed a fixed mindset.
You begin to view effort as a sign of stupidity, because if you were truly a genius, you wouldn't have to try hard. The result?
You start avoiding difficult challenges so you never look foolish. You drop out of a beginner's Spanish class because you aren't perfectly fluent in 2 weeks. You miss a deadline at work and blame the software, the Wi-Fi, and the time zone, instead of admitting you have terrible time management. Think of a beautiful fox known for its pristine, glowing coat.
It discovers that the most nutritious roots are buried deep in thick mud. Instead of digging and getting dirty, it refuses to eat them, choosing to stay hungry because getting muddy would ruin its image as the perfect, beautiful fox. Are you avoiding a real challenge right now because you are actually busy? Or because you are terrified of looking stupid? It is terrifying to realize that your greatest intellectual strength might also be your biggest blind spot. If your intelligence can build a prison of excuses around you, how do you break out?
The answer is not to stop being confident.
The answer is to become confident enough to admit when you might be wrong.
Psychologists call this intellectual humility.
Mark Leary's research shows that people with high intellectual humility are better at evaluating evidence, less defensive when challenged, and learn much faster. Intellectual humility does not mean you have low self-esteem. It doesn't mean you are insecure. Truly confident people are the most intellectually humble because their ego is not threatened by being wrong. They view being wrong as an upgrade to their knowledge, not a downgrade to their identity. Picture a fox tracking a scent perfectly through the woods. Suddenly the wind shifts.
The fox doesn't keep running in the wrong direction, just to prove it was right.
It stops, admits the old scent is gone, turns around, and finds the new trail. Humility is what keeps it fed. So how do you actually practice this in your normal life? Start building the disconfirmation habit. When you make a major decision, ask yourself, what specific evidence would it take to prove me wrong? If your answer is that absolutely nothing could prove you wrong, you are not using logic anymore.
You are defending an ideology.
Next, seek out friction instead of affirmation. Stop asking people, "Does this look good?"
That just invites them to flatter you.
Instead, ask, "Tell me what I am missing." Give them permission to critique you. Finally, decouple your identity from your ideas. Stop saying you are a certain type of person who holds a certain belief. Say that you currently hold this view.
If the idea fails, your identity survives. The smartest person in the room isn't usually the one speaking the loudest, using the biggest words, or dominating the argument.
Sometimes, true intelligence is having the quiet strength to look at a situation, look at yourself and say, "I don't know," or "I made a mistake."
Intelligence is an incredible tool.
It can help you build an amazing life, solve impossible problems, and navigate the world. But it is not a substitute for self-awareness.
Don't let your brain become so good at defending you that it destroys your ability to grow. You can understand exactly how people fool themselves. But there is another problem that is even more painful. Sometimes a person can genuinely be highly intelligent, completely self-aware, and still deeply struggle to build the life they expected. Why do so many smart people find themselves paralyzed, unable to translate their potential into actual success?
The video on your screen right now breaks down exactly why that happens and how to fix it. Click it, and I'll meet you there.